So crazy idea to have an introduction to mosses and liverworts online, because to be honest, there are things that you need to see in the flesh. But we've tried, I've tried my best. It is it is aimed at beginners. So those of you who are already interested in bryophytes might find it a bit boring, but carry on, stay with us. I hope you don't fall asleep, that's all. Okay, what are mosses and what is the aim of this online course? It really is just a nice chat about bryophytes. So what are mosses and liverworts? What they look like. So sometimes you go out, you find things that look a bit different. Is it a moss? Is it a liverwort? Is it a lichen? It's a difficult call. So hopefully, by showing you a few photos, you can get your head around what you're looking at. Also where to find them, and finally, how to learn more about them, especially once the lockdown is over. Okay. So bryophytes, as a very quick introduction, they are plants, effectively, and they are plants that are considered lower plants because they reproduce from spores. I'm not going to go into too much botanical detail, but that's what they are. There are 3 divisions of bryophytes, and the first division is Mercantiophyta, which is basically the liverworts. Liverworts are divided into 2 types. There are leafy liverworts, which clearly have one stem and leaves coming off the stem, distinct leaves coming off the stem. And then there are thallus liverworts, which are the ones that, instead of having distinct leaves and stems, have actually got a plate of tissue, flat plate of tissue. And that's how they look, how they appear. The second division is the Anthoceratophyta, which is basically hornworts. There are only 4 species of hornworts in Britain. They look, when they're not fertile, these are the fertile parts, the green spiky things are the fertile parts. But when they're not fertile, they look very much like thallus liverworts. The difference is obviously in the way the reproductive structure looks completely different from liverworts. And the final division is the bryophyta, so the mosses, the true mosses, of which there are 3 different types. Acrocarpus mosses, pleurocarpus mosses, and Sphagnum. Don't worry about the terminology, we'll go through the different types a bit later. So that's just for you to have a bit of a general idea of what's what. I'm going to go very quickly through what makes them different from vascular plants. There are many differences, but the main one that strikes me is the fact that they cope with the lack of water in a completely different manner to vascular plants. So just a reminder, vascular plants are able to control the state of hydration by using mechanisms inside the plant itself. So they have this lignified vascular tissue that basically brings water up from the roots and brings it up to the leaves, and the other way around. So that the phloem takes the nutrients all the way down into the roots. Now, mosses don't have this lignified vascular tissue that connects to the leaves. They have vascular tissue which is different, that doesn't connect to the leaves. So that means that the state of hydration is controlled by the external environment. They can't do anything about it. They just, if there's not enough water, they shut down and they suspend their metabolism. So when you see, I've just taken a couple of pictures, probably not the best, but just to give you an idea, this is a pleurocarpus moss, Homolothecium sericium. It's growing out in the garden on an asbestos-roofed kind of shed. And you can see it in a dry state. It has got all its leaves pretty much lying against the branch, and it's all kind of oppressed. And the branches themselves curve up and are oppressed to one another. You spray it and suddenly it slowly starts to open up. It's almost like a flower opening its petals. So in this case, wet, It's not a huge difference, but it's starting to look a lot more untidy. The leaves are slowly unfurling, and it's trying to wake up and make the most of the water being there. So moving on, and now we've got an idea what the difference is. What do they actually look like? Okay, and this one of the things difficult to work out at the beginning is, have I got a liverwort, which is the red thing in the image? Have I got a moss, which is this beastie there? Or have I got a sphagnum? Sphagnum, quite easy to tell, but we'll talk more about that later. Liverworts are the good ones to start off with. We've already said there are two types. This is a thallus liverwort. So the thallus is clearly the green bit. Okay, so this is Pellia epiphylla, grows on banks very often. So what you see is this green mass of tissue. This particular moss at the moment, this liverwort at the moment, has sporophytes in the picture. So the sporophytes are basically what, we've already said they reproduce by spores. The sporophyte is what holds onto the spores and then disperses it. So I hope you can see the pointer, but the long white stalks are called seta. They basically hold up the capsule, which is the black bit. There's the capsule. And it basically has the function, the seta, the stalk, has the function of elevating the capsule. So when the capsule opens out, and some of these capsules are open, the brown ones, the spores can disperse a little bit higher up. The wind can catch them and actually disperse them a bit further. So liverwort capsules mature first, then seta matures after, is very short-lived. It does its thing, opens up, lets out the spores, and then dies very quickly. And now, not all thallus liverworts look the same, and there are important features that you can look at when you look at a thallus liverwort. Sorry, excuse me. The interesting things about the way a thallus liverwort can look is normally in the thallus itself. So this particular one is Conchocephalum conicum. It has a very thick thallus, and it has got odd markings on the thallus. They're called polygonal markings because they do look like a bit like a polygon. And they also have these dots on them, which are called pores. So the thickness of the thallus and the ornamentation, which is these polygons on it, give you an idea of what genus you are looking at once you get the hang of the various genera. We've just seen Conchocephalum has a very, very thick thallus. We'll now look at Metzgeria, which is another thallus liverwort, but the size and the shape of the thallus is completely different. Very, very thin, one cell thick, and it also has, instead of having polygonal markings on it, it has got a midrib in the middle. So I think the next picture actually shows it, how thin it is, because it's on its own on bark. You can see how thin it is and how it's got this middle bit, which is a midrib. It's a very different organisms, but still thallus liverworts. Finally, an interesting thing to point out, like all bryophytes, liverworts reproduce asexually. So don't just reproduce by spores. Very often, some species only reproduce asexually. This picture has got the thallus, and then it has these vegetative propagules, which are called gemme. And they're contained in these odd round containers, which are called gemme cups. They effectively are like cups. They hold the gemme. The purpose of having the cups is that when they concentrate all the gemme on there, a drop of water comes down, it splashes onto it, and it then disperses the propagules. And obviously, when the propagules fall on the right substrate, they will then grow into another plant, which is effectively a clone of the mother plant. We'll now move on to the leafy liverworts. As a picture, this is a very common liverwort, Liverwort bidentata, but you can clearly see here there is a distinct stem and leaves on both sides of the stem. Here are the leaves, and the long one is the stem, and it can branch as well. One interesting thing about this genus of liverworts, Liverwort, it has underleaves. So the underleaves are at the back of the shoot. So when you look at this liverwort as it sits on the substrate, you can only see the two sets of leaves. When you turn it over, you can see it has tiny underleaves. And you can see that the underleaves are completely different shape from the leaves. This is common. There are liverworts that have underleaves of similar shape to the main leaves, but some that are completely different. So the shape of the underleaves is also quite an interesting feature when you're trying to identify your liverwort. I wanted to touch here on what we often is called in Keys a complicated leafy liverwort. Now this particular one is Frolenia tamaricii, again fairly common in North Wales, especially in Celtic rainforest. But you can see from the size bar, it is absolutely tiny, but you can see how much is going on there. So if you can see the pointer, there is a stem. The stem is clearly forks. It's branched. It has leaves on either side of the stem. The leaves themselves have what's called a lobule. So these odd helmet-looking features are actually part of the same leaf. They're attached to the main leaf, and they seem to have the function of holding water. It's very difficult to know really what they're there for, but the shape is quite bizarre, quite interesting. Again, the shape of the lobules in the genus Frolenia is often diagnostic. And in addition to a main leaf, the stem, the main leaf, the lobule, they also have underleaves. And in this species, they are quite large. They are here, completely different shape to the main leaves. So when you're looking at liverworts, there's quite a lot to look at. Another leafy liverwort that shows, in this case, the sporophytes. So they can, we've already seen the thallus liverworts with sporophytes, and this is a leafy liverwort with sporophytes. What it's got is this great big sporophyte, which is basically formed of the capsule, which is black inside, and you can clearly see it through. And then this large perianth, which is basically modified leaves that envelop the capsule, protect it maybe, but certainly envelop it. One oddity about this species, Cephalosia bicuspidata, which is quite common again in woodland, sometimes in bogs, is the disproportionately large size of the sporophyte compared to the size of the shoot. Hopefully you can see in this image, but the shoot is this tiny thing over there, and the sporophyte is this great big whopping object over here. In the larger photo, if you can see the pointer, the shoot is just down here, very, very small. And this liverwort itself is not more than 0.5 to 1.5 millimeter wide anyway. So we're talking very, very small shoot, quite large sporophytes. Very often this happens, especially with the very small liverworts. Once this capsule is mature, then the septa does develop. It comes out of the perianth and it disperses the spores. We can move on to mosses. So you think you found a moss. Is it a pleurocarpus moss or an acrocarpus moss? And we've got two pictures of the two. I'm going to start with the acrocarpus mosses. What makes an acrocarpus moss is the way it grows. So it grows with one main shoot that grows upright and has a seta or a sporophyte that arises from the tip of the main stem. This is clear from the picture. You have a main stem with all the leaves, another top, you have the sporophyte coming out, you can see the seta, you can see the capsule. And in this case, the capsule is still immature, so it has its hat on, what's called a calyptra, a hat. And when the capsule is mature, then the calyptra falls off and it reveals the capsule which is mature. I've got another picture of an acrocarpus moss, because this one clearly shows how you can have a seta coming out of the end of the shoot. There it is. But also how the calyptra is there, so the hat is there, but the capsule is not yet visible. The capsule is still immature inside the calyptra, and the calyptra will sit, so the seta will sit there with its capsule. The capsule will slowly mature, become bigger and bigger. The calyptra will then eventually fall off and open, and the capsule will open. Now, if we move on to the pleurocarpus mosses, these are usually creeping. So first of all, the shoot starts growing horizontally along the substrate, and then it branches profusely and the branches grow upwards. I've chosen a picture of Brachythecium rutabulum because it is an unusually boring moss, but it does fruit a lot. So this allows me to show you not just the shoots crawling along the substrate, but also the profusion of sporophytes. So the sporophytes here, instead of arising from the tip of the shoot, they arise from side branches which are specialized for that. And when the sporophyte grows up and when the capsule is mature, it loses its calyptra. Now in this picture, some of these sporophytes still have the calyptra. I'm not sure how clear the picture is, but some of the sporophytes have got this white sheath on them, and that's the calyptra. There's some at the top of the right-hand corner of the picture, and some others, the calyptra has already gone, and you can see the capsule fully, and it has a lid on it. I want to talk to you a bit more about this structure of the capsule, because I got this lovely picture from Catherine that shows Hypnum cupressiforme. Clearly there you can see the seta, the long stalk, and then you can see the capsule. The capsule doesn't have a calyptra anymore, it's fully mature. It has got this odd conical lid on it, but if you look at the one next door, that hasn't got a lid anymore. So it's got to the stage of maturity where it wants to open, it wants to disperse its spores. The lid has fallen off, and what it has instead is these yellow sort of fine hairs are the peristome teeth. The peristome teeth form a kind of a membrane on top of the capsule, that when the state of hydration, humidity in the air is right, they open up and they allow the spores to come out. As soon as it's a bit too dry and a bit too wet and there's not much wind, they close back, so the spores stay inside and they don't disperse anymore. So very clever mechanisms there. The third group of mosses we were talking about is the sphagnum. So sphagnum is very different from even just from a quick look from the pleurocarpus mosses, but they are a really important group of mosses because they are basically ecosystem creators. They have this structure, cellular structure, that allows them to fill up with water and effectively keep moist for a long time, even after maybe the top has dried out. So they are extremely important. When you're looking at a sphagnum structure, you have a stem, and the stem is more visible down towards the bottom, is the dark brown bit in the bottom. The branches, instead of just appearing everywhere like on a pleurocarpus moss, they appear in groups of 2 or 3 from, or 4 or 5 sometimes, from distinct points along the stem. So here's one, a bit further up, there's another one, 3 or 4 appearing from there, and so on. These bunches of branches are called fascicles. And at the tip, the growing tip of the actual shoot is at the very top, and it grows from the top, and the bottom slowly dies but still holds on to water, which is why sphagnum is so important. This is Sphagnum papillosum, quite a chunky sphagnum, so quite useful to show you the features. The next one, again, it's one of Catherine's photos. It has got the clear structure, very visible. The stem is very visible because it's dark red. So you can clearly see the dark red stem. You can clearly see where the fascicle, the bunch of branches shoots out at this point and then further up, and you can clearly see the growing point going up. And you can, if you had a bigger screen than you probably have, you could see that the stem itself has leaves on, but it's very difficult to see from this photo. Okay, so now that you know what they look like, where can I find them? And the good news is everywhere. So bryophytes are ubiquitous. You get them in your garden. You may have a low diversity of bryophytes in your garden, but you will certainly have them. This picture is from my garden. There's a bit of a dry stone wall, which is mortared at the top. And we've got an acrocarpus moss growing on the top. They are present in grassland very often. They are important parts of, for example, species-rich grassland as well. You can find them in rivers. In woodland, they are a very large component in woodland. In heathland, and wet and dry heath all the same. In blanket bog, very important in blanket bog. We've already said we can even find them in sand dunes. And even, that they can grow over different substrates. We've already said they grow in sand dunes, so on sand, but they also grow on rock. They really like growing on wood, so a lot of them are epiphytes, and they grow both on living wood and on dead wood. They grow on soil, obviously, like we've seen the pellia growing on soil. They even grow on man-made substrates. This yet to be identified acrocarpus moss grows on the tire cover of my spare tire, so my car. It looks like an orthotrichum. I haven't identified it yet, but I just thought it was quite nice that I haven't cleaned it out because I quite like it. So I wanted to go through with you just to have a quick look at what mosses you're likely to find in lockdown in your garden or in build-up areas. And I'm going to start with the ubiquitous pleurocarpus moss, Rhytidodelphus squarosus, because that's bound to be in your lawn. It is a pleurocarp, so it grows sort of along first and then it branches. But the interesting thing about this moss is that it has a nicely red stem, and then these nice looking, sort of starry looking leaves that start off pressed to the stem and then go over at 90 degrees and then bend down again. So it gives it this sort of a starry appearance to the tip of the shoot. And that's really useful. If you go out in the garden later, go and have a look in your lawn, and chances are that you see these starry looking shoots of Rhytiodelphus squarosus. It's absolutely everywhere. It's a generalist. It can also be, it's found in grassland, it's found in woodland. You can even get it in blanket bogs, so it's a bit of a generalist, but one to bear in mind. In your garden, what you're likely to have is as an Acrocarpus moss, really common on mortared walls. It's got a bit of a sort of hoary, kind of hairy appearance. It forms little cushions, and it has these really long sporophytes compared to the size of the general moss. They're quite long sporophytes, and they have a long cylindrical capsule on them. But what's really interesting is the long white hair that's at the tip of the leaf. And as you can see, this picture shows it wet. It looks completely different when it's wet. It's got rounded tip to the leaf and this long hair point that makes it look so much like a hedgehog, I think. When it's, I think both the sporophytes and the hair make it look like a hedgehog. I think it's great. And that you will find that on your wall probably easily. Another moss that grows on mortared walls and that looks a bit similar to the previous one is Grimia pulvinata. This one is also hairy. It also has this long hair coming out of the leaf, but the sporophytes, instead of just coming out and being long and cylindrical, they grow out and then bend back into the cushion. So you really don't mistake the two because they look so different when they've got, and the sporophytes are produced freely, so chances are you're going to find the sporophytes there. But instead of having them proudly sticking out, they bend back and they go down into themselves. So chances are you go to any piece of concrete that's lying around in Wales especially, and you will have Grimia pulvinata. Again, I put a picture at the back of what it looks like when it's wet, because it does have a slightly different look when it's wet. And this is really common to a lot of bryophytes. They look very different when they're wet. We're moving on to liverworts that you might be able to find in your garden. This you might find either in plant pots sometimes, or at the edges of the path. The soil is a bit compacted. It likes to grow there. So it's a thallus liverwort. It's one of the ones that has got polygonal markings on the thallus, and you can see it's got little sort of pores as well, and as well as the markings. But what's really characteristic of this liverwort is the fact that it mostly reproduces by gemme. So it doesn't reproduce sexually, but it produces these little gemme, which are asexual reproductive particles, and it holds them in this beautiful semicircular cup, which looks like a moon. So that lunularia, luna is moon in Italian and in Latin. So it looks like a half moon. And you can see at the top of the picture, there are some of these little particles, little propagules, which are pretty much round discs. And when a drop of water comes in, it disperses them and it creates more lunularia. So that one you are likely to find at the edges of paths or even in the garden when you're going out and have a look at it. I am going to talk about mosses in other places than the garden, because it's important to realize that a lot of habitats that we consider of importance for conservation are pretty much shaped by bryophytes. And when I'm saying shaped, I mean in a lot of cases they're a big component of the general the general habitat. I've chosen blanket bog to start off with because it's an obvious one. Blanket bog is created by mosses. We've already talked about the fact that sphagnum moss has the ability to store water. Effectively, what you've got in blanket bog is a whole area completely covered in sphagnum moss that holds water, water that comes from rain, effectively. And all the other plants and all the other insects, reptiles that love sphagnum, blanket bog, they are allowed to be there by the presence of the sphagnum underneath. So they are effectively ecosystem creators in this case. And I'm going to show you that blanket bog can look a little bit boring, but when you actually look closer, the way it changes when there is a bit of moving water, like in this case where it's formed a nice bog pool, other different types of sphagnum start growing around it, and all the other vascular plants grow on top of it. The fine patterning within blanket bog actually makes it absolutely fascinating. It's not just this vast expanse of nothing, it's extremely patterned at a very small scale and extremely fascinating. To start off with, to describe what creates blanket bog, I'm going to show you one of the main peat building sphagnum, which is Sphagnum papillosum. So it can create lawns or it can create hummocks. I've got a picture, the first picture, to be honest, is more of a lawn, but it can create the classic hummock shape. And it's quite a chunky sphagnum when you look at it. It's not one of the dainty ones. It's quite a chunky thing, and it has got nice fat branches that end with a blunt tip. The main color that you get it in is either sort of this dingy green, or you can get it in its proper color when it shows color, which is a bit of an ochre color. A very, like I said, a very chunky sphagnum that sits there and slowly builds up, and it creates peat. And it also is found in valley mires, where it slowly colonizes areas of water and creates these lawns, and slowly grows out of water to almost kind of cover the water area, and creates an area of sphagnum on top of the water. Another nice peat building sphagnum is Sphagnum capillifolium, and this you also find in wet heath, not just in blanket bog, and it does create these fascinating tight hummocks like in the picture here. So in wet heath and in blanket bog, it can create these really tight hummocks. It's very distinctive. It's much smaller than papillosum, very much smaller. It has this lovely red color and a very dainty appearance, much daintier than Sphagnum papillosum. But again, it creates peat by storing water and growing slowly higher and higher, and creating these hummocks. If you are lucky enough to live in Wales and maybe at the edges of a village, you might be able to see Sphagnum capillifolium. If you go for your walks slightly further out and you go into the Frith, it grows in wet heath, which is often one of the sort of chunks of habitats that you can get in the Frith. So maybe you can go out and try and find Sphagnum capillifolium. If you get a bit of a boggy area, you'd be surprised how quickly in North Wales you get the sphagnum coming out. So moving on to other habitats of importance for conservation, woodland. And we are lucky in Wales that we still have quite a good amount of woodland. One of the most common mosses that you will find in woodland is Isothecium myosoides. I have chosen this one because it completely covers the trunk of oak trees. It just seems to love the acid bark of oak trees. So it's one that if you're just going for a walk in a little bit of woodland, there's a few mature oaks, go and have a look. It can form a complete monoculture over a an oak trunk. The photo from Philippa that I've got here, it shows clearly that it's kind of covered the whole trunk, and then something's happened. This is a photo from a more humid woodland. So the brown thing that's covering it up is a liverwort. Is probably the liverwort I've shown you earlier, the Frulenia tamaricii. So it is now being the moss is now being colonized by a liverwort. But if you go to a less humid area, the moss will be almost the only thing growing on an oak trunk. It is a pleurocarpus moss. It grows along and then it grows up, and it forms this kind of almost a bit of a tree-like appearance. There's like a trunk that goes up, and then all the branches at the top. Very common moss, you're likely to find it. Moving on to the more exciting types of woodland that we're lucky enough to have in Wales, the Celtic rainforest. Well, that really is the perfect habitat for bryophytes. Bryophytes cover everything: the woodland, the floor, the boulders, the tree trunks, the tree branches, absolutely everything. And they are a hugely important component of the Celtic rainforest, together with the lichens, which are also there, and you'll find out all about next week. A few distinctive species of what we call oceanic woodland or Celtic rainforest, ones that you will be likely to see if you go there. I've chosen this Acrocarpus mossday Cranon scoparium because it's big. It's a big thing. It's a chunky thing. When you look at the leaves, these leaves that all sweep to one side are about a centimeter and a bit. So it's a big species. And it looks, I think it looks absolutely gorgeous, very elegant looking, with its kind of hair all going to one side. You know, it's a bit like, a bit of a very fashionable moss, I say, with this haircut like that. So one to look out for on your walks. One very common pleurocarpus moss that you'll get on the floor, and it will carpet the floor of an oceanic woodland, is Rhytidiadelphus laureus. Now, we were talking about Rhytidiadelphus squarosus in your lawn, so the red stem and the starry appearance of the leaves. Well, this one clearly is the same genus. All of them have a red stem in this genus, but the leaves, instead of going out and spreading out like that, they curve to one side, and they almost look again like the other moss we've just looked at, like it's got out its comb and it's sort of combed it to one side, or it looks a bit like a windswept tree. You know, it's got that appearance. Rhytidiadelphus laureus, you can get it in less humid woodland, but when it's in oceanic woodland, it's just ubiquitous and it carpets everything. So it's one to look out for. A bit more of a specialist, because these two you can find in nicer woodlands, but a species which is really a specialist of Celtic rainforest is another pleurocarpus moss. It's called the Scobrium brevirostre, just because the names are never easy. But this one, it really is a moss that when you find it, you know you're in a special place. It has got a similar appearance to one of the Rhytidiadelphus, but it has a red stem like it. But the leaves don't tend to curve to one side at all, or to spread out or anything like that. It's a lot daintier, and if you look carefully with your hand lens, the stem is covered in this fuzz, which is basically modified leaves that grow on the stem itself. Not sure whether it is an adaptation to hold on to water better, but it is a characteristic that quite a few mosses have these. They're called paraphilia. So a very pretty moss that is a specialist of the Celtic rainforest. You can't really talk about the Celtic rainforest without mentioning what really makes them special. But these are much smaller species. They're liverworts. These are really, really tiny, but they make the Celtic rainforest. So I thought it'd be good to show you at least a few pictures of them. I've chosen Lepidosa rectans because it's quite common and it has a really interesting appearance. And this is a very small moss, liverwort. It is about a millimetre wide, the main branch, but it branches off. It has quite good branching pattern at 90 degrees from the stem. And if you look at a micro photograph of it, it has tiny little leaves that look a bit like a hand with fingers. It has 3 or 4 fingers. And the underleaves, which are not at all clear from the picture, but take it from me, they look exactly the same. So it has 2 sets of leaves, and the ones at the back also look like little fingers. Very small, but it can completely cover very large areas. It can grow as an epiphyte. It can grow directly on maybe on a bit of a bank, and it can also grow on decaying wood. So something you might come across. Another really pretty and worth looking at liverwort of a genus of which there's several species, but this particular one I've chosen because it can grow on rock, but also on trees in the Celtic rainforest. It is a plagiochyla, so it's a leafy liverwort. It has 1 main stem and 2 sets of leaves. This one doesn't actually have underleaves, as a genus plagiochyla doesn't have underleaves. But you can clearly see from the photograph, individual stems have got the individual shoots have got 1 stem and the little leaves coming out. No underleaves. And a little close-up will show you that at the edges of the leaves, there are little teeth as well. But what's really funny about this moss, this liverwort, is that when it grows as a tuft, which it does, with lots and lots of shoots growing together, and when it grows on trees, it projects forward. This little cushion projects forward. It looks a bit like a lean-to shed sort of roof, and it looks a bit like the chocolate box cottages with the roofs that are thatched. Well, the whole kind of cushion looks a bit like that. So you can actually see it. It's small, but you can see it projecting out of the bark. So a really nice species. Liverworts also are an important component of fallen dead wood, and they will colonize dead wood that has lost its bark, and it starts sort of, I suppose, coating it at this point. On this picture, there's this trunk that's fallen down, but this, I hope you can see it with the pointer, there is an area there that has a finer patterning where there is, instead of there's some pleurocarpus mosses there, but this area is completely colonized by this other very, very tiny liverwort, which is called Novelia curvifolia. It can also look purple, so sometimes you're attracted to it by seeing this patch of purple on the trunk. When you look at it closely, this is what I mean about complicated liverworts. So the main stem is kind of visible there, but the leaves are really complicated. They're basically a bit kidney shaped. They have a dip in the middle. One part of the leaf has a sac, and you can see from the sac that it holds water, or in this case, there was water there. It dried out. It's got air bubble in it, so that's why it looks the way it looks. But clearly the sac is meant to hold water. And then it has these weird projections, and I always think it looks like some kind of alien. because it has these odd projections looking out, and that's one leaf. So one leaf is this part, it goes down, it goes round here, it has a sac and then two long projections. So there's a lot going on in a very, very tiny liverwort. And you'll find this in dead wood in the Celtic rainforest. This is just really scratching the surface. There's so much more there, and that's why I prefer, obviously, field courses, because as you're walking along, you see other stuff and you can actually see the diversity. There's so much diversity in every single habitat, and also the sheer number of amount of biomass there it's absolutely fascinating. But at least I hope this has given you a bit of an idea of what to go out and look out for, and also has whetted your appetite and you might want to learn more. So what do you do if you want to learn more about bryophytes? First of all, get a hand lens. Because without a hand lens, it's going to be very, very difficult to see bryophytes. If you're a botanist already and you have a ×10 hand lens hanging around, that's perfect. Good start. Start off with that. It's good. Go out in your garden and start looking at things with your hand lens. I strongly recommend, if you do want to learn about bryophytes, to get hold of a copy of the field guide to bryophytes of Britain and Ireland, because it has got photographs, and very good quality photographs as well. And I think if you have got the photographs, it just starts to things start to become a bit clearer. It has also got a key at the front, and for common mosses and liverworts that you're likely to find, it works with a bit of patience and a bit of learning how to use it. It works, and for common things, you probably, it's a good start, basically. Also look at the British Biological Society website. It does have really good information for beginners. It's got Beginner's Corner with really good articles written by Sharon Pilkington, really worth looking at. So use the BBS website. While in lockdown, okay, so now you think, oh yeah, I really want to go out and see bryophytes. What do I do? Well, during your daily walk, if you have a mobile phone, use your mobile phone to take pictures of what you find. You'd be surprised, a lot of mobile phones, even not the sort of posh ones, can take quite good pictures close by. So take maybe a picture of where you saw the moss. So take a sort of a landscape picture, it was on this tree, and then take a picture of the moss itself, and that will remind you where it was when you found it. If you're not in a protected area, or like SSSI or an SAC, and if you know the landowner and you have their permission, then you can collect a specimen, especially if you've got a lot. So where you found your moss, there's a lot of it. Take a couple of shoots, it's fine. You can take a couple of shoots, provided you've got permission. Put them in a little envelope and take it home. Paper is better than plastic to take mosses home. When you get home, try using the field guide and see with your hand lens and the photographs, and maybe have a go with the key at the beginning and see if you can identify it. Have a go. You never know, you might find it. And when you've identified it, I've said to Roy, I'd be quite happy to, for my email address to be given to people who attended this workshop. If you've gone through the effort of actually trying to find the name for it, or even if just you think, I think this is a leafy liverwort, or I think this is a pleurocarpus moss, email me with the pictures, and that way I can sort of point you in the right direction. I can say, well, I can see why you thought it was a moss, but actually it is something else, or whatever. We can try, we can have a go. And after this, if you've got the right identification, or if with two of us we can get to the right identification, we can put the record on Cofnod, which is really good, because chances are, if you're going for your walk, there will be very few records of that particular area. It's probably somewhere urban that might not, or a bit sort of, let's call it, where these specialists might not go and record. So you can actually add records, which is really good. If you really want to learn more, and you can actually join the British Biological Society if you really want to pursue it. It's a very small society, really friendly, lots of nice people who are always really keen to help beginners. So we obviously, as a society, when there isn't an emergency on, we have meetings all over the country. So you can join, even if you're a complete beginner, and you'll go out with every day with groups of experts, and they will be quite happy to help you out. So it's a nice little society with a good website that can really help. Obviously, when the emergency is over and when the lockdown is over, I'm hoping to restart meetings. If you're not from North Wales, there are groups of the British Biological Society in a lot of places. So go on the website, have a look and see if there's a group near you. Learning with other people is most definitely the best way to do it, because on your own, you lose momentum. You'll think, oh no, this is far too hard, and you won't carry on. I know, I have been there, got the t-shirt. But when I met up with people from the non-flowering plant group, it really gave me an incentive to carry on. Our meetings are advertised by the Cofnod newsletter. So if you're not on my mailing list, you can go on my mailing list, just let me know. But if you're not on my mailing list, our meetings are advertised by Cofnod. And also Cofnod give us the microscopes. We have indoor meetings as well as field meetings, during which those of us who have a microscope bring their microscopes. Catherine normally borrows the microscopes from Cofnod. And if you haven't got a microscope, you're very welcome to use those microscopes, and we learn together. And that's really important. So there is stuff out there that you can use to learn more about mosses. There's even a resource I've been made aware of recently, that there is a Welsh, so if you're a Welsh speaker, there is a Welsh section of Wikipedia which has got actually a list of liverworts with their Welsh names. So it's great. You know, there's so much out there that you can use to support you on your learning journey. So I hope you're not all asleep. I finished with my talk now. I just wanted to say thank you to Cofnod because it was a good idea. I know it's not the same as being out in the field and seeing the things in the field, but hopefully we will do that after the lockdown. Thanks to the Celtic Rainforests Wales for their support. And also, can I just say thank you to my bryologists of the non-flowering plant group, Philippa Thompson and Catherine Moss, because I am a hopeless photographer. They're both very good photographers, so most of the pictures are theirs. So thank you so much for this.